Well, here we are in my perennial bed, and as you look around here, it looks a little sad. We've had several frosts. Most things look a little crispy and a little nasty, and we're going to talk about what to do with your perennial bed today to get it ready for winter, which isn't much. I mean, you can make it as complicated as you want. I prefer to keep things very, very simple. And so what we're going to start with today is removing the annuals. There's a few annuals that I have planted in the bed just to give me some color all season long. And it's a really easy thing to do. This happens to be a petunia that's pretty much done for the year. And I don't dig them out. I leave the root systems in the ground because that just adds more organic matter to the soil as they decompose. So I just take my handy dandy little hoe here, cut it off at the ground level, and there you go. And this goes into the compost bin. And we'll do that all throughout the beds wherever there's annuals. Take them out, get them out of there, because they're not going to look good during the winter months at all. Next year I'm going to want to plant annuals in the same place, but there's bark mulch on top, which I put on here earlier this year. The first thing I'll have to do now to get this ready for annuals for next year is to rake the bark mulch off for the winter months. So I've got this pile of bark mulch down here, and I'm not going to reuse it for next year. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to toss it back here where the perennials are to get it out of my way. And I'll use fresh mulch up here next year because it'll look nicer with the annuals and this old stuff. Okay, so that pretty much takes care of the extra mulch that's in the way. Now the next thing I'll look for is any weeds that may have come up during the fall when I wasn't paying attention. I've got some Roundup type products, some glyphosate. This happens to be high yield kills all. Roundup works as well. I've got a nasty weed right here. It's a perennial weed. Annual weeds I'll just leave because they'll die over the winter. But the perennial weeds needs to go. So get them good and wet. Let them dry off before you do any watering. But fall is a great time to take care of perennial weeds because that weed killer goes down into the root system and sits there all winter long and kills the roots of the weed, and they won't be back next spring. We've got the soil cleared off. I want to prepare it for spring just roughly. I'm not going to do a lot of work. I just want to rough dig it. You can use a shovel. Holy cow! You can see how compacted the soil gets during the growing season. So I like to do this in the fall to loosen things up, leave it just nice and clumpy, lots of clods. There's no reason to spend a lot of time breaking up the clods and making it nice and smooth like you were going to plant. Let the winter freezing and thawing do that for you. This would also be a great time if you wanted to add some compost. Now me, I'll add the compost in the spring when the soil is a little easier to work. So you get the general idea here, getting this annual area ready for next year. Now the rest of it, what are you going to do with all of this dead stuff? Well, you could, if you wanted to, cut it to the ground. Cut everything you see here right to the ground and get rid of it. I don't like the barren moonscape look for the winter months. So I only cut back the things that I don't want to see for the winter. This is a good example right here, these Gloriosa daisies. They're not going to look good at all. So I have my head shears. Start at the top. Cut it into small pieces. And that's it. And by clipping off these flower heads like this and leaving them lay, you're going to be spreading seed for next year's flowers. So to recap here, we've gotten rid of the old annuals that looked bad. They're going to go off to the compost bin because they're just too much of a pain to cut back with the clippers. Then I raked off all the old excess bark so it's out of the way because I don't want to dig that into the ground. Just throw it back into the old perennials. Then I dug up the soil where I'm going to plant annuals again, leaving it nice and clumpy, cloddy like this, and the winter will break it down. And I cut back the ugly perennials that I don't want to look at during the winter. So the final step for your perennial beds for the winter, at least for my perennial beds during the winter, is to put down some fall fertilizer. I like a nice, slow release, good quality fertilizer that's going to release the nitrogen and phosphorus and potassium and the trace elements slowly during the fall and into winter while the ground is still unfrozen and the plants are still growing roots and building their crowns and building their energy for next year. And it also helps them make it through the winter better. So now all that's left is to apply the fertilizer. And while I do this, I think we're going to go look for MJ. She's going to talk to you about how to winterize your pots for next year.
Keith just talked to you about the importance of taking care of all your perennial beds. But as we know, for a lot of great summer color, we've had a lot of flower pots that have been filled with a lot of great spring and summertime color. But now it's time to empty them out so that they're ready to go for next spring. There's all kinds of different pots that you might have. You might have some that are made from foam, others that are made from fiberglass. A lot of those kind of pots can sit outside through the winter after you clean out the plants and they'll be just fine. They're not likely to go ahead and crack. But some of your more expensive pottery, especially your glazed pottery, that kind of pottery or anything that's terracotta, if water's allowed to get in there and expand and freeze over the winter time, you're going to crack your pottery and ruin it. So go ahead and empty out your pots with all of the plants that you've had in them. If the dirt that you have in the pot has been in there for a couple of seasons, let's go ahead and pitch it, put it into the garden, work it into those perennial beds that Keith has just prepped. Otherwise, you can take the dirt that you have inside there and go ahead and dump it into a container so that you can use that soil for next spring. Then after you've dumped out all of the soil, go ahead and take all of your glazed pottery and turn it upside down to make sure that none of the water has a chance to get in there and settle. Coming up next on Dig In, we're going to talk about preparing your water garden for this winter as well. That and more coming up on Dig In.